with all the serious stuff associated with flute technique, etc., we also hope on Simply Flute that there'll be a lighter side to this, and apart from just being a magazine for flute, we hope also to develop it gradually as a lifestyle magazine. So there'll be other things other than flute happening on it. And now we're going to start off by taking you out onto the street into the area of London that I live, so you can get a little bit of a picture about what happens in London. And this is my road. I live in Bedford Park, which is in Chizik, about 30 minutes from the centre of London. In fact, going that way is Heathrow, and going that way is the centre of London. So I'm very well placed to get into town, and for all the trips I do, to get out of town. Now behind me, this beautiful house, sadly is not my house, but it is the house of one of my more illustrious neighbours, and I live in this road. Bedford Park was the first garden suburb in London, and Sir John Betjeman, the poet and writer, said about it that it was the most significant development in the Western world as a garden suburb. As you can see, there's lots of green around. For London, it's ridiculously quiet. You can hear some goldfinches perhaps, and occasional birds chattering, and the odd drill as builders get on with their inevitable work. But it's a very, very quiet area of London for me to live in. In fact, I'm the only person really making the noise in this road, polluting the atmosphere with my flute playing. So this is where I live, and we're now going to take you down that way. We're going to head towards the river, but before we get there, we're going to a place called Turnham Green, which also has some very interesting history attached to it. So this is Turnham Green, and when I come from the centre of London back on the Underground, I take the train to Turnham Green because obviously that's the nearest Underground station to my home. But this was a very, very interesting green in 1642 in the reign of Charles I. Charles I had lost popularity in the country, and he'd lost London basically, so with a large army he decided to take London again. And he came from the west and he came towards London. In London, and approaching him from the east, was the Parliamentarian army under the Earl of Essex. Now in those days, what I find particularly interesting is the fact that there was almost like a season for war. So they called it the campaign season. And in the campaign season, it had a definite beginning and end. And it seems a crazy thing to do with a war. And I just I wonder the conversation between two generals. General 1, so shall we go to war? Well, you know, General, it is close to the end of the campaign season. Very good point. I think probably we should leave it till next year then. I guess actually at that time we were in a mini ice age. It was called the Little Ice Age. And I suppose it wasn't particularly nice to go to battle in the freezing cold. The main point to remember about this, it ended up as being a standoff, was the fact that the Parliamentarian army had lots of civilians in it. And Charles I knew, with his very much larger army, that if there had been a huge amount of bloodshed, he would have lost even greater popularity. So he decided to back off. So there you are, a potted history of Turnham Green, the area in which I live. We're now very close to the Thames River, and to get to the Thames we have to go past buildings like this. And there are so many of these timber buildings in Chizik, which are a great signpost to the past. Chizik is also the place where William Hogarth, the 18th century artist and satirist, lived. And he lived just a couple of blocks that way. But I think this is a rather interesting road, not simply from the point of view that it goes to the Thames, but follow me, because I haven't walked down here before, and there is something that drew my attention that makes me think that many flute players might have been here before. What do you think this sign tells us? And then if I go to the bottom of my garden, there's this beautiful archway, and this is this small pond that is at the back of my house, which is my own private property. Actually, it's not, but we're right down by the Thames, and I just thought it'd be quite nice for you to see the Thames through this beautifully sculpted archway. We're now going to go up here and take a look at the Thames properly. You're now looking west along the Thames, the big river that runs right the way through the centre of London. And this river, at the moment you're looking at it and it seems very straight, but in fact it completely snakes its way the whole way through London. And this, of course, in old days was a main artery for trade. Goods coming into England and leaving England tended to come all the way along the Thames. And if we go upriver that way, we get to the Tower of London, where, as many of you probably know, people were beheaded. And that way down the river, going west again, is where Hampton Court is. And Hampton Court was the home of Henry VIII, one of the homes of Henry VIII. And whilst he was king, he had a wife called Catherine Howard, who was alleged to have had an illicit affair. So she was sentenced to death, beheading, and she would have come up the Thames in the middle of the night in a boat from Hampton Court, and she would have been taken up to the Tower of London in the distance for her execution. So if there are any girls out there thinking of having that illicit affair, just remember Catherine Howard. The other thing that happens on the Thames, and this is happening in a few weeks from now, is the Oxford and Cambridge boat race. And the boat race actually goes past this very point. And this is a historically famous boat race in England. And apart from anything else, for us it also signifies the beginning of spring. So everyone tends to be happy. Another interesting point about living next to the Thames is the fact that, of course, the river rises and falls with the tides. So we're pretty much 30 yards from the side of the Thames here. And when the weather is really bad, as you can see from these gates here, these are floodgates, and they're to stop the water going into people's homes. And of course, we all know that musicians like a drink from time to time. And another great thing for me about living in Chizik is that it is the home of Fuller's beer. And I have to say there are a couple of pubs around here that are very close to the brewery. There's even one on the corner up there. And the beer that they serve is absolutely sensational. Flat as anything and warm. The perfect British beer. And like all great cities, London has got some amazing parks to walk in. Now we're in the beginning of March at the moment, so this is all looking a little bit bleak, but you can tell with the water, the trees, the wildlife that come spring, this is going to be absolutely amazing. So as often as I can, I get out and take a good walk around this park at Chizik House. And here we are again right next to the Thames in a very picturesque park called Strand on the Green. And in the summer, in the spring and the summer, it's just a massive amount of colour here. And of course, because it's such a beauty spot, all the way down here are pubs or inns. And this one here, the City Barge, is one of my favourite places in the summer to come down, sit outside with a pint of that flat, uninteresting British ale and contemplate life.